Thanks for joining in early morning from San Francisco, all bundled up. I can see. I am here with Dr. Anuja Chandrana, who has a background in movement and sports sciences. She's a qualified physiotherapist with degrees from a whole bunch of Ivy Leagues, Purdue, Columbia, has worked at Stanford, specializes in women's health, and also with a specific interest in chronic pain. So there's a lot of stuff to get into here. One of the things which I find so fascinating about you is you've lived in Japan, San Francisco, and of course, you now live and work in Bangalore. And if I had to sit back and think of someone, who do I want to chat with? What kind of background should they have? I think you check all those boxes.
I appreciate it.
So I'm really excited to speak to you. We've spoken before, of course, and instantly hit it off because we have so much in common. And I'm going to start there talking about the first thing, which is the first few of your lives you were in Japan. And I think that's super interesting. So let's start there. Do you remember what that was like? Do you have any memories of living in Japan?
It was really amazing place to grow up because we were independent from a really young age. Japan's a super, super safe country. So, we started going to school on our own on the train, starting from like first grade. And back then there weren't any cell phones or anything like that. So you just kind of like figured out life. And so I think that was probably one of the most amazing parts about living in Japan. I also think that's partly because my parents wanted us to be independent. And so they were very pushy about that. Like even traveling to India when we were younger, they would just put us on the plane on our own, which was like unheard of. And I still think
nowadays that would never happen.
Yeah. Even back then, people probably thought they were crazy, but it teaches you a lot about just like, I don't know, my dad is very much like, you can do anything, like you'll figure it out kind of personality for us, which has been great.
So just fast forwarding then, after that experience, Japan, the US, about a year ago, you decided to move to India and now you live in Bangalore. And I have to ask this because I get asked this question all the time. Why are you in India? What are you doing here?
If I had $1 for every time somebody asked me that, like I wouldn't have to work, I feel. Why am I here? I married a man who is a Bangalore boy, and when we first started dating, when we were in our early 20s, he told me very clearly, like, yeah, I'm here. We met in the US. He's like, I'm here, I'm going to work, but I'm going home, like, eventually. Long term, I will be going back to India. So if you're okay with that, we can continue this relationship. Otherwise, long term, this is not going to work out. And I was like, yeah, that's actually fine. Because I loved growing up outside of America. Those first 10 years, I think that that's what made me who I am today for the most part. And so I always felt like I want to expose my kids to a different world. I think living in America is great. I love it, but it's also a bubble in a lot of ways. And I always felt like I connected with people from India and my cousins a lot more. And then, again, my dad's concept of you'll figure it out. Like never say no to an opportunity, never just leave a door closed, like try it, experience it. You never know what's going to come out of it. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. I also feel from a physio perspective, there's so much I could do here. I think that the physio world is only just beginning to grow in India, and it's going to grow exponentially, and there's so much potential. So I think even from my end, I knew it would take some time, but I was like, I can definitely like make an impact in India. And so I just took the plunge.
I'm sure a lot of people are glad that you did, especially your clients. I'm glad you spoke about the work perspective because that's what I wanted to touch on next. I can try and describe what you do, but I think it's better that people hear it from the horse's mouth. So what do you do?
Yeah. So I do a lot of things. I'll start with that. From a physio perspective, I basically work with two sets of populations. I work with the neurological population. So anybody who's had any kind of neurological impact, whether it's Parkinson's disease, MS, somebody who has had a stroke, brain tumor, even like cerebral palsy. And on the other end of it, I also work in women's health, which also has a neurological impact, just in a different way. But I work with a lot of chronic pain in terms of sexual health, sexual pain, any kind of women's health condition from a spectrum of ages. So women who are, sexually active or want to be sexually active but cannot be, women who are pregnant, then postpartum, women who are going through menopause. And so we treat all kinds of women's health conditions like incontinence, things that happen with postpartum. Pain is a huge one, of course, pelvic pain, endometriosis, just to name a few.
I want to zoom in on women's health and specifically chronic pain. What's the biggest area that needs to be addressed when it comes to, firstly, women's health overall?
I think just getting women to be active. Like, I think that's number one, the biggest thing, because I feel like inherently, especially in middle class or above India, right? So if you're talking about like from a socioeconomic structure, women just don't really exercise, or if they do exercise, they're just going on walks. And I think like that's a huge, huge problem, right? Like, I don't know, if you think about like the women that from different ages, it can be people our age, it can be older, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe because of your fitter background, it's different, but I think just outside of that world, if you think about it, like now more and more women are getting active, but it's still a huge issue. And also like general walking culture, even though we're living in metropolitan cities, like people don't walk in Bangalore. I'm like, I don't think people walk in general in anywhere in India, right? Because like if you have to go from point A to point B, even if it's a 10-minute walk, you will take a car or an auto or something, right? Which is different from if you're living in a city outside of India, in my opinion. The other thing is like general activity, right? Like we call it activities of daily living, like doing, cooking, cleaning, all those things, where in the Western world, we have to do everything ourselves for the most part. But in India, we usually have somebody who's doing that for us. So even that level of activity is less compared to the Western world. And so I think just getting women to start focusing on themselves. Another part of it too is just from a society perspective, right? Women are the ones who are managing the house, but we also are working. So you're having two roles. You're not just doing one. And so then where do you find the time to take out of your day to focus on yourself and your exercise and your health? And they often take a backseat, right? So they're usually like prioritizing the other people in the family over themselves. I do a lot of talking to my patients about that. Like, you need to focus on you, whether that's just from a usual living perspective or even in their own sexual health. And then I would say that currently, primarily, I'm seeing women who have sexual pain. So whether they have attempted intercourse and they cannot because it's painful, or they're fearful of it, or they are having intercourse but it's painful and they're not experiencing any kind of pleasure. So even with that, essentially, most of the time what happens, this is not always the case, but most of the time it's because the muscles in their pelvic floor are hypertonic, or they have a lot of tension in them and they are kind of closing in around your vaginal canal versus relaxing and opening up. And that can oftentimes be because of the lack of activity that they have. It can be because of the anxiety or stress that they're experiencing. It could be because they've had some kind of trauma before, in terms of like sexual trauma or even just other kinds of trauma. Or it could be because they're fearful of pain. That they've always heard that it's going to be painful, so they expect it to be painful, and then it either is or it doesn't happen because they're so scared of that pain. So we do a lot of work on breathing, a lot of connecting to your pelvic floor muscles, because also part of it is fear because you don't know what's going on. It's a lack of knowledge, right? And this happens in the Western world as well. I think it's more common in India because it's just not spoken about. In the Western world, in school, we had sex ed. And in India, I don't even think they really get that from what I've heard from my patients.
So just gonna pause here because I think a lot of stuff that you said is so interrelated. Firstly, just about the importance of being active and moving, which of course is something that I've seen a lot with people who were new to working out, for example. How do you push them to make that time for themselves? Because unless you become physically active, you don't know how amazing it feels, right? And that link between feeling good, working out and feeling good is so important because it's what gets you back into doing it on a daily basis. This link that you mentioned between physical activity and sexual pain is really interesting. And I think a lot of people don't know that because, I don't think anyone, first of all, like you said, is even really talking about this. And secondly, if they are, they wouldn't think, hey, maybe if I work out every day, I won't be experiencing this discomfort or this pain. And I think that also you mentioned the mental health connection. So the mind-body connect, which is so important to emphasize as well, because if you're working out, you're feeling good, you're also becoming more aware of your body, and then you're able to maybe be less stressed, and less stress, less anxiety means that, again, it's linked to potentially reducing that pain you would feel during penetration or even that fear. Because like we spoke about last time we met, and I've been speaking to a lot of people about, so much of pain is about your perception of pain, right?
Yes.
So I think that's something that's really important for people to know, regardless of what kind of pain they're experiencing, whether it's related to sexual pain or chronic pain. The psychological aspect is so integral. And I'd love if we spend a bit of time talking about that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's why when our patients come in with this chronic sexual pain, I oftentimes recommend a mental health expert that they see along with me. Working with them in conjunction with physio is great. Like, we need both going along together because, like you said, we have this mind-body connection, right? And there's a lot of different theories behind this. And like pain neuroscience is just like very fascinating in general. In general, we should be in this rest and digest state, right? Like, everything is great. We're digesting our food, we're relaxed. And then we have times when we get into our flight or fight response, which is good. Like, we have some kind of stressor or we have some kind of pain that happens, right? We need to like figure this out. We need to either move away from it or we need to tackle it and then, get over it. What happens is that with people who have chronic pain, they essentially get into this extended period of fight or flight. And so you're kind of stuck in this mode. And then everything that is coming at you, you're perceiving as a threat, even though it might not necessarily be one, right? So it might have started as a threat response because you had something, but then now everything is, you're creating a threat response to everything, even though it's not a threat. And so a light touch can be painful, right? Something is just like, even movement can be painful, right? Which is something that I think maybe you're experiencing a little bit of as well. And so how do we get our bodies and our systems and our nervous system back into this rest and digest mode, where that's our baseline instead of fight or flight being baseline? And so that's the anxiety part of it, the fear part of it, stress, right? Because work is stressful, family life is stressful. So, stress is a huge part of people's everyday lives. And then even people might be feeling some level of depression, which can happen because of the pain also, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the depression causes the pain, but the pain can cause the depression, or feeling like you can't do the things that you want to do anymore, which is super frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And I think that there aren't enough practitioners out there to tell people, like, you can do it. You can maybe do it differently, but for now until you get better, but you can do it. I think the immediate response is don't do anything, right? Just don't move. Stop everything. If it's causing pain, don't do it. Instead of being like, well, hold on, let's think about let's talk about the fact that you might be having this extended level of pain. Let's talk about that fact that maybe we need to try doing it, but maybe to a lesser degree, see how you feel, like play around, right? I think it's just always this like extreme, one or the other. Or practitioners are like, it's all in your head. You're just making all of this up. Like, just do it. You'll be fine. Just push through it. Right? Which makes people feel really crappy because they're like, no, I really cannot do it. It's really hard. It's really painful. So I think that we just need to change the way we practice and the way that we talk to our patients and explain things to our patients.
Yeah. And I think it's spot on, because in my journey with dealing with my chronic back pain, I did hear this initially several years ago that, and this is pretty big hospitals where you have a huge, spinal department, you have some pretty bigwig doctors saying, don't bend forward. Just keep your exercises really light. Do you lift weights? Don't lift weights. I mean, luckily I did never listen to them. Of course, it creates that sense of fear in you that, hey, maybe I shouldn't be doing so much, which then further exacerbates the pain, right? When it happens. And I think that now I am starting to see that change, or maybe I'm meeting better doctors, I don't know, who are saying you do need to do some movement, you need to push through the pain. But I think it's a journey, right? In terms of understanding, when do you listen to your body to rest, especially on days when the pain is elevated, versus when do you push through? And I think what's helped me is firstly finding a physio team that's been really good at helping me with strength and conditioning given my back, but also understanding different types of pain. And that's really like a self-education journey, right? In terms of what's acute, what's chronic. Even with chronic, is it the pain that I'm getting? Is it soreness from post-workout, which is a good pain? Or is it some sort of spasm that I need to be careful about? And I think, again, what's helped me even in the latter case is understanding that I'm in control of my body. So learning, again, exercises and release work that I can do by myself, and not be dependent on a physio, although physios are great. But if I'm traveling, or if it's the middle of the night and something happens, like I have that little ball, I have the tennis ball, I have that, whatever that black ball is called, the really hard one. I have my foam roller, like these are the things that people need to know how to do themselves, so that if they're in that situation, sometimes it's as quick as a 5-minute release, and then you feel much better. And then that fear dissipates a bit, right? You think, okay, it's okay to do a hard workout, even if I get this pain, because I can release it myself. Like I'm in control. And I think that only through education and having the right physios and interacting with people has allowed me to realize those things and feel more comfortable and in control of my body. So thank you for being one of those physios who is doing this work for people everywhere. For people who don't have access to amazing doctors and physios, apart from videos like this where you can share awareness, what do you recommend to people like that?
I wish there was and there might be, I just haven't tapped into it, like a community for people who have chronic pain to talk about, what's going on, so people don't feel as isolated and alone, because it can be really isolating. And people don't understand why, so I think you made a really good point about the control, right? And so I like to tell, especially my patients who are women, my job is to empower you. And even from a physio perspective, the biggest thing about physio is I feel like I call myself like I'm the mother bird and my patients are the baby birds. And so eventually I want them to fly away from the nest. I do not want them to be living in the nest with me, right? And so that, like when you said like you have to be independent eventually. Yes, you do. The point is not for you to go to physio for the rest of your life. The point is for you to eventually fly off and graduate. And maybe sometimes you need to come back if there's a new issue or if you need a check-in, right?
Or
But
massage. Yeah.
for a massage, yeah, exactly.
My husband always says it's not a massage, it's a release. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Just make me feel good.
Deep tissue massage, yeah. But yeah, so the more you know and the more you learn, the more power you're going to have. Going back to the point of having a community, right? When you have chronic pain, there are a lot of things that help you with the pain. One of them is being in control, and part of that is having like a schedule, for example, right? Or like people like to go to bed at a certain time and get up at a certain time and work out at a certain time. And that's because that makes them feel good and that keeps their pain under control so they can still do other things that they enjoy. Looking into breath work, again, YouTube has some great guided. Obviously, if you can find a practitioner who can talk you through this, at least initially, that would be super helpful. But I think breath work plays such an important role in terms of helping to calm that nervous system down and help it bring it back to a rest and digest state, even if it's just temporary.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And all the things you mentioned in terms of things that help calm the nervous system, breath work and meditation, and I think being really present in the moment, help with sitting there with the pain, although it's a lot easier said than done. And
100%.
yeah, especially in a culture where painkillers are so accessible and they're just, prescribed like candy. So how do you, I think I keep coming back to this because it's a question that I also continually ask myself on days when the pain is at an elevated level, let's say, a 9 or maybe even a 10. And let's say you don't have the option of sitting at home and resting, although that would be ideal to an extent, like listening to your body. What do you suggest for people on those days?
Yeah. So I still suggest movement. Like I think that the sitting at home and resting, there's a time and a place for it, but I also feel like gentle movement, it doesn't have to be anything aggressive, right? Like just some gentle stretching, some gentle movement, some light walking, like all of those things actually help with pain management versus just like necessarily like just sitting there. The other thing I think that's really helpful is distraction. So trying to kind of distract yourself from that pain. So like in situations where you can't necessarily like you have to go to this social engagement, right? Or, your kids, you have to manage them. Like they're not going to go anywhere. You cannot just like let them be. I think utilizing like distraction techniques to try to think about other like something really simple I sometimes give my patients is like think about a place in your body that's not experiencing pain. So if you're experiencing a lot of pelvic pain, like what about like in your ear or your nose? So maybe we try to focus on that. Um, Basically thinking of grounding strategies because like I said, pain is a stress response, right? So how do we get you to kind of decrease that stress response and ground yourself? Because oftentimes that will help you with the pain management. That can be various things. It doesn't necessarily have to be breathing and meditation, although that helps, right? But sometimes that's movement or dancing or music or like talking to a friend, getting social, right? Because chronic pain is so isolating. I really encourage my patients to be social, interact, right? And sometimes in India, that social aspect is a little too much and they do need a little bit of just like alone time. But I tell them, like, don't let your pain stop you from doing the things that you want to do. Because oftentimes if you're doing something that you enjoy, whether that's like artwork or dancing or whatever that is for you, that'll help bring the pain down as well.
Yeah, yeah. There's this really cool website by this pain scientist. I'm sure you know of it, called Tame the Beast. And it just reminded me of what you just said, is thinking of pain as this beast that you live with, and just understanding how to control him and tame him to live your life, and not let it stop you from doing what you really want to do. And I love the part you said about dancing and socializing, because even if you can't step out, like just calling a friend and talking about the latest, I don't know, Karan Johar episode, Coffee with Karan, it takes you away from that space and gives you a good laugh.
Exactly.
Going back to women's health and sexual health as well, I know that you're doing a lot of work in terms of creating a safe space for women. And I noticed the term non-judgmental coming up a lot. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that really means and why it's so important to create that non-judgmental space in healthcare for women specifically.
I just find that I mean, I don't know, it sounds like, to me, it's like common sense. Why are we judging people, right? Like, I don't know. It's not beneficial to anybody to assume anything about somebody, to shame anybody. Indian women already have so much shame, and women in general. I won't say this is only about Indian women, but so many people come to me and they'd be like, well, I wanted to be sexually active before marriage, for example, but there's just so much shame around it. Then I just never enjoyed intercourse because of that. Like, that was always in the back of my mind. Or is there something wrong with me because all we talk about is, oh, my hymen should be intact? Or, there's just so many myths out there. And it's all perpetuated by the fact that most of these books on women's health have been written by males historically. Like, they don't know anything. I'm just like, it's really infuriating to me. Like, we're not the generation of just like trying to put each other down or compete with each other. It's more about bringing each other up. And so I think knowledge is power. And so if you're scared to ask a question to gain knowledge, then how are you going to be empowered?
Yeah.
Right? And I think like that's the kind of space that I want to create. And people come in and they're like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm so sorry that you have to look down at my vagina. Like, I don't think it looks like I'm like, what's wrong? I was like, and I'm like, no, this is like my job. I love it. Like, I'm not like, oh, I like make sure I look down at your vagina, but like, this is why I want to help you. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, we all have them. I have one too, so automatically like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that this has to, like, you have to deal with this. Right. Or, and I think that at least in the Western world, there's so much more conversation about it. Like, people are more open about talking about it. And I hope that we can get there one day. But it's just like, people are even like, oh, I'm on my period. Like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to leave the house. Like, just like traditionally, because women had to just like sit in a corner when they were on their period. And it was almost like it was kind of shaming them, even though like the point of them getting a period and being fertile is that they are the ones that are child bearers, right? Like, it's actually a good thing that you're getting your period, and it's like something to be celebrated. But yeah, so I think, and even from like the LGBTQ community, right? Supporting them, like even like some practitioners can't understand that people who are queer can also have sexual pain. Like, it's not necessarily penis and vagina. It can be like finger and vagina or like dildo and vagina, right? And that's also important. And so I think it helps that I've grown up in the Western world and like I've been exposed to all of these things, and it's been like normalized and talking about it even at home a little bit more.
I think it really helps as well when you feel safe and you feel like the person you're speaking to is, in terms of a doctor or physician, is really receptive. And I think that that's amazing that you're able to create that space for women, partly because of your background, like you said. When you walk into a doctor's office, there's no sign that says, hey, I'm judging you, right? But it's in the tone, it's in the type of questions that get asked. Like for no reason, someone's asking me if I'm married, and I'm just like, well, how is that relevant? And then I realized why a gynecologist wants to know if I'm married or not. Because even I don't have that. Like my background is also from outside India. So for me, it was really bizarre. But yeah, just when you get asked those sorts of invasive questions, which are in my opinion, not relevant to my health, it becomes harder to then ask questions. Like you said, right? Ask the right questions because knowledge is power. But I think for a lot of women who are walking in already feeling shame, like you said, then encountering someone who has judgment written all over them, although isn't saying anything disrespectful directly, it's just becomes like this vicious cycle of, oh my God, I can't ask him because what's he going to think of me? And you know, it's better that I just not know, which leads to more myths, right? People believing more myths, reaching out to the wrong people, and then being left in the dark and not being in control of their bodies and their health, and just going down that vicious loop. So I think it's really, really important to have that safe space and know where to go to get that safe space. I want to ask you though, because it seems like nothing would shock you, given that you've seen it all. Is there anything that surprises you now, like day to day? Anything like completely bizarre that has happened where you were like, whoa, what's this?
One patient came in and they had gone to see another pelvic floor practitioner. And the patient had vaginismus, which they're having pain with intercourse. The muscles are basically spasming and not allowing intercourse. And the pelvic floor therapist had written like under the prescription, like electrotherapy.
Wow.
And I was like, oh. And then they wrote that the patient needed like 50 to 60 sessions of physiotherapy. Yeah, like you've been for physiotherapy, like 50 to 60 sessions, that's not a joke. Like,
and 50
I was,
60 sessions of electro.
oh my God, like how far off are we for a treatment method? Even if you Google this, you will not find electrotherapy as one of the treatments for vaginismus. I was just like really alarmed.
I think that would just turn the person off of sex. That's just too much work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, what are we doing? Yeah, I think about it for myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, that would not be comfortable in any way.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that shock me.
Okay, well, it's a good thing that we have you here spreading the word and creating a baseline level of knowledge. Because again, I mean, not to shame anyone who doesn't have the knowledge, it's literally something that's never spoken about, never talked about at home. You don't learn it in school, and then magically you're just supposed to know everything one day when you're ready to take that journey. So I think awareness is really critical, and hopefully conversations like this where we are talking about it and people can access it is going to help move things in that direction. Thank you so much, Anuja, for your time. It was lovely having this chat with you. Really fun.
This is my first podcast ever, so
yeah, you did really well.
Thanks.